Hello, I'm State Senator Hoon-Yung Hopgood for the 8th District. Welcome to another edition of the Hopgood Hour, my monthly news show for the 8th District, bringing news and views from Lansing. As always, please feel free to contact my office with any questions or concerns that you may have with state government. Please feel free to give us a phone call, write us a letter, or send us an email, and we'll do our best to address your concerns. I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Chris Wigent, who is the superintendent at RESA, and we're going to be talking about education issues in general and the issues involving the dissolution of the Inkster School District in particular. And so we're pleased to have Mr. Wigent on the show today. Welcome, Superintendent. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Could you just start and tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what RESA is?
Sure. 33rd year in education. I came up the traditional ranks: teacher, assistant principal, high school principal, and I'm in my 23rd year of being a superintendent. 12 of those as an ISD or a RESA superintendent, and then the remaining superintendent at a couple of K-12 districts throughout the state. So RESA is Wayne Regional Educational Service Agency. It's the intermediate school district for Wayne County. And so what's an intermediate school district? We provide services, leadership, some oversight, professional development, and a number of collaborative services for the 33 districts and the 114 charter schools in Wayne County. And it's the most populous county in the state, as you may know, and RESA provides services to the largest number of students in any county, getting up near 300,000 students.
Now, ISDs, which RESA is, as you explained, are across the state. Is that correct?
Yes, there's currently 56 ISDs. Many of them serve on a county scale. Some serve 2 or 3 different counties, but they've been around. We're in our 51st year, and when we were put together, we were viewed as an intermediary between the Michigan Department of Education and the local school districts.
Okay, well, thank you for that information.
Sure.
We wanted to talk about the Inkster School dissolution.
Yes.
That wasn't the only school district that was dissolved, is that correct?
That's correct. There were 2 in the state. One was Saginaw Buena Vista up in Saginaw County, and then Inkster was the second one, and Inkster, of course, is in Wayne County as well.
When did you become aware of the fact that there may be a need to consider legislation to deal with these 2 challenging situations?
You know, I started to hear about that shortly before Memorial Day. There was kind of some winds that the legislature was taking a different look at how to deal with districts who were in a deficit situation. We were used to emergency managers. We were used to, especially in Wayne County, Highland Park School, where they turned that into a district of charter schools. But when I first heard about that, I was concerned, quite frankly, a little bit confused about why we suddenly would handle a district like Inkster in a different manner. So finally, when I really found out is when I went up and heard, it was in early June, when I went up and heard the committee that was trying to deal with this issue. And that's when it really landed on my radar screen, because it was clear to me from attending that meeting and testifying that this was going to be approved. And so we went back and started to try to deal with all of the issues, many that we didn't know about at the time, of dissolving a school district, something I never thought I'd have to do as a superintendent, quite frankly.
There's another step involved that is far short of dissolution, that doesn't involve necessarily an emergency manager. It is a consent agreement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So
yep,
that's a process where some folks at the state basically pass along a set of requirements to a local school district to help them deal with their financial challenges.
Right, and that's an opportunity that's been given to some of the school districts. However, that really wasn't an opportunity that was provided to Inkster. I don't know about Buena Vista.
Is it clear to you why certain opportunities are made available to certain school districts and not others? Do you have a sense that there's some rhyme or reason to that?
You know, I was very confused because over a year ago, we worked with the Highland Park School District, in a similar type of deficit situation, and they were given the opportunity, according to law, to appoint an emergency manager. They did that. In fact, that's still in place. And quite frankly, I thought that's how we would head with Inkster as well. I didn't see this targeted legislation coming down the pike, and quite frankly, was very surprised by it.
Well, I know that you said that you had first heard about it late spring. This was an issue that was talked about in terms of identifying a school district or school districts that were in such financially challenging situation that they would not be able to keep their doors open for the school year. And so the thought was to try to address those issues so you didn't have something that's disruptive during the course of a school year. Is there some wisdom in that? Does that make sense?
You know, I think it makes sense if we would have taken a much closer look at the situation. Number one, there was still a lot of debate about whether or not Inkster had money to make it through the school year. In May, they received approximately $12 million loan, if you will, from Treasury. And so we never really came to consensus on whether or not they could make it through the school year. And that bothered me. I think had we looked at the figures a little closer, so that we would have been sure that they would or would not be able to make it through the school year, I thought that would have been appropriate. Dissolution is a step beyond, in my mind, of emergency manager. I mean, emergency manager, consent, all of those other options keep the community intact. It keeps the school district in the community. And your viewers know, as well as you and I know, that for many, the school district is the pillar of the community. And in this situation, Inkster now as a community does not have a school district. They've been dissolved into 4 different ones. And especially in a situation like Inkster where there's high poverty, residents now do not have school buildings to go to. They do not have that kind of hub that a school district provides a community. And I'm not sure that was thought of before this action was taken.
Can you talk about the legislation? So you had some concerns with it. I know that I had concerns with it. Certainly the process in terms of dealing with a relatively complicated, relatively sensitive issue like this. Can you comment on the process and what the legislation did?
Yes. This was a situation where I went to testify against this legislation. I was really concerned that we were looking at this in June, with the school year just around the corner. But it was clear when I testified, and I tried to talk about how important it is to give the communities, the students, both in the sending and receiving districts, an opportunity to really work on that transition. And I encouraged the committee that I was testifying to try to keep that in mind. Sure, we can dissolve the district, we can redraw boundary lines, we can do most of the things that are needed. But when we're dealing with children, who many have gone to one school district all their life and lived in that community, and now we're asking them to suddenly pick up and move to a brand new school district, and by the way, not with all of their classmates or colleagues, that can be very difficult. It's difficult for adults to pick up and move, especially difficult for children, as well as the children and the communities in the receiving districts. Remember, they really didn't have a choice on whether or not to accept, if you will, Inkster students. And so there was some transition that was needed for those communities, those school buildings, those kids who attend school with each other for many years. And now we are going to bring a significant amount of new kids into the school, into the culture. And I just really hope that we would take a step back and think about the children and what we could do to make this as comfortable as possible.
Now, this legislation was passed through almost in the bare minimum time that you can pass legislation through.
Yes.
And that, again, speaks to the fact that the legislature may not have taken the time to look at all the concerns and all the issues that would arise from this sort of a situation. Can you comment on the timeline that the legislation provides for determining whether or not there's going to be a dissolution?
Yeah, when this got through and then the governor signed it, it was clear that that Inkster was a targeted district. Everyone around the table knew that was going to be a dissolution, even though there were a couple of hoops to qualify the district. But it was very clear when it was passed that everyone knew that Inkster and Buena Vista were going to be dissolved. And it was clear to me with the speed that this moved through. Also, what I felt when I testified, I really tried to bring up some points to maybe pause this and have people think about things we knew, the impact on children that I talked about, but also some of the unintended consequences. The unintended consequences, for example, with one of our districts who was a receiving district, already a deficit district and in financial concern, received 3 of the school buildings. Well, what are they going to do with 3 school buildings? They don't have the expense, they don't have the dollars to continue to operate those buildings. So now they have 3 vacant buildings.
That's Taylor Schools, and that's the school district that I live in.
Yes, correct.
So I'm certainly been hearing about that. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No,
I just wanted to interject that.
No, that's very fair. And remember, this was not a local decision. This was something that, because of the legislation, was really thrust upon these communities. And I do want to say, and there were 4 communities in which this district boundary lines were redrawn. I think the communities and the school community, superintendents, boards of education, teachers, and students have been very accepting, and appropriately so, of all of the Inkster students who have been reassigned to districts. On the other hand, there were some things that were set up, the buildings, for example. What do you do if you're a deficit district like Taylor? You're struggling, you've got requirements of deficit elimination plans, and now you have 3 buildings. Now you have students who you might have to provide extra transportation to because they are not in the former district. And once again, I'm just not sure that anybody sat down, certainly not with the education community, but even amongst their legislative colleagues, and said, we really need to chart out what's going to happen here intentionally and unintentionally and make sure that we support these districts that are receiving these students and support the families that are going to be moving as well.
So what's challenging about this whole situation is that the legislation was passed in order to deal with a situation where a school district might not be able to keep its doors open for the whole school year, and the idea was to prevent confusion, to prevent disruption, to prevent problems with that fact. And in fact, because of the way the legislation was handled and the process was handled, in fact, many of those sorts of challenges arose anyway. And that seems to be something that we shouldn't, I guess, forget in this conversation.
Absolutely. And I would think if you would ask any of the families of the 1,200 students who attended Inkster last year, that they might say that their lives were disrupted. They learned about a new school district maybe 6 weeks before the school year started, just like we would say that the 4 receiving districts, their school year was disrupted by finding out that they were accepting and having new children there from a different community, new facilities, which we've talked about. What do we do with all of the assets? All of those types of things that, quite frankly, were very disruptive to many as well.
So if you're a deficit district and if you're receiving students, and I'll think about Taylor, I'll mention them because I'm a little bit familiar with them. I represent 3 of the 4 receiving school districts, so they all each have their own story, but Taylor is a deficit district. They've in recent years closed school buildings to try to address the deficit and to try to provide services in the most economical fashion.
Yeah.
And here they are in the middle of the summer being told, you may get some students, we're not sure exactly how many are going to be coming. What kind of challenges does that pose for a school district in particular that's in deficit?
Well, it certainly poses a lot of challenges. One is, how do you staff? And we didn't know how many kids. We truly didn't know until the start of school, and then maybe even a couple of weeks after, how many children they were going to get. So how do you staff that for the beginning of the school year? And you have to be conservative. You're a deficit district. Your plan has been approved by the Department of Education. But if you step outside that plan, then there are ramifications to that as well. So how do you staff? How do you provide transportation? How do you know if you have to purchase extra buses or what you have to do? What about your building capacity? What if you suddenly find yourself needing 1 or 2 extra classrooms and that creates an issue? It's all of those things that we as educators like to make sure that when the kids enter the doors that it's as calm and predictable situation as possible. And here it was 6 weeks before, and suddenly it's thrown into a little bit of a disarray, quite frankly, not only logistically, but also financially, as we discussed as well. Districts had no way of knowing how many children they were going to have come to their district. And as a school superintendent who likes to plan carefully and who does, that creates a lot of disruption all around.
Well, you need to be able to plan. You need to know what your budget is. You need to know how many classrooms you're going to need, all those sorts of things. Back to the school buildings, they were inherited or received by those school districts as well. Some of them are in decent shape, some of them are not. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's correct. For example, with the buildings that Taylor received, probably my recommendation would be that, with all things considered, that 2 of the buildings should be demolished. Taylor would not have the funds to be able to pay for all of the expenses, including insurance, if they're insurable. The building, the grounds, the utilities, all of those types of things. I'm aware that there is some talk about providing financial incentive to districts who receive those buildings, but as of right now, we've seen not much action on that. And so currently, districts have to take that out of their general fund. To be fair, there was a little extra stipend given to school district for each of the children who attended from Inkster, but it's a 10% of their state aid. It's minimal, and there are a lot of additional expenses. I think that bonus, if you will be eaten up very quickly. The third building is an operational building, and I think that's what presents a conundrum. To demolish a building that's really in pretty good shape wouldn't seem responsible. It wouldn't seem fair to the Inkster community. But what does Taylor do with that? I mean, I know we're looking at a couple of different options, but it really puts them in a bind to do the things that's ethically right, but also business appropriate. So once again, it's a gift that was not asked for. In Taylor's credit and the other 3 districts, they're doing as well as they can with it. But once again, there are no guidelines, there were no instructions that came with this. It was kind of like, here's your buildings, and you make a decision now.
If you receive a building that's usable in your school district, you have some responsibility to protect that asset. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Not only for your own school district, but also for the Inkster community. But the problem is, to try to operate a school building, you need all of the things that come with a school building. You need all of the supplies. You need to have administrators and teachers. And Taylor just isn't in that situation where they could afford and have the luxury. They've closed down buildings already. They couldn't just keep this open as a school building. So I know that they're being very thoughtful about the options, and hopefully there will be an option that will work out for the district.
Let's switch gears and talk for a minute about looking at it from an Inkster taxpayer resident situation. What do they deal with in this?
Well, I can tell you a few of those things because over the past 3 and 4 months, I've spent a lot of time with the Inkster community, both in groups and with individual phone calls. It's very disturbing. Number one, there's a local school board that represents the taxpayers and the voters in that community. That school board is now gone. And so people in the community wonder, what impact will I have on the school board where my child now attends? Well, yes, they get to vote on the school board in their new district, but remember, they voted these people into office, a local control, and suddenly they were told, well, your voice doesn't count, you're going to lose your school board, and they did. I also think about the Inkster community, and I have a meeting coming up with the new city manager to talk about ramifications of trying to attract people into a community that doesn't have a school district. And not that it can't be done, it's part of 4 school districts now, but I go back to the fact that, especially in Inkster, the real pillar of the community was the school district. It's where people went, it's where they gathered, it's where they supported. There's a nonprofit human service agency that serves just the Inkster children. they're wondering what to do now about the grants that they've received for after-school programs. And they now have to reach out to the other 4 school districts and to try to rewrite the grants because it's now much different than it was. So, and I think also in the Inkster community, like in any community, there are a lot of parents who have been there for many years, were very comfortable with the school district, comfortable that their children were safe, they were being provided meals, they had a teacher who cared for them. And as a parent myself, I put a lot of faith in my local school district. And now suddenly to hear that that secure environment is now going to be removed and I'm going to have to,
Because the current school board is no longer there. There's no school district there in the sense of having a school board responsible for it. They're attached to neighboring school districts, so those existing school boards in Taylor and Wayne Westland, Romulus, Westwood, they have responsibility for those territories, but the people in those territories don't have a vote yet.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So truly, if you're an Inkster resident concerned, you don't have a school board member that you know or you can go to or even that you voted for. Yeah, that's very accurate.
And taxes, I understand, are still being collected from Inkster residents, from property owners.
Yes, and that's going to create, I'm glad you brought that up because that's going to create some issues. One of the ways that it's planned that the Inkster community will pay back that deficit is through their taxes. And quite frankly, the non-homestead, as well as their sinking fund, expires at the end of 2015. So I think it's going to be a challenge to ask a community to renew a millage for a school district that doesn't exist anymore. And so if the voters do not vote to extend those millages, which is highly possible, then one would turn and say, well, how is that community going to pay off the debt that's currently owed by the school district? And I'm not sure that was given a lot of careful thought before this legislation was approved as well.
So the local taxes that are collected go to pay off that debt, meaning they go to Lansing because Lansing is the one that provided the was it $12 million loan?
Yes, amongst other loans. But yes, Lansing, as late as May, the Department of Treasury, $12 million loan for Inkster, which I found a little disconcerting that a district can get a $12 million loan and 6 weeks later they're dissolved. I think that sends mixed messages to the community, to the school board. They were doing what was required of them. And I mean, if I'm a superintendent, I've just received a $12 million loan, kind of leads me to believe that my district is going to continue on for a while. It was just very difficult message, I think.
It seems extremely backward. It just doesn't make sense. What would be the situation with any debt, any money that was owed with Inkster, had that loan not been provided by the state?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. And quite frankly, had the loan been not approved, it would have been a much more difficult fiscal situation. But once again, the message you send when you have a district that's in dire fiscal straits, well, we understand and we're going to give you a $12 million loan. That leads me to believe that I'm going to continue to have school in that district. And once again, 6 weeks after that loan, the district is dissolved. It just doesn't make sense to me and to many others as well.
It seems like there's a lot of strings being pulled by Lansing, and the folks that face the brunt of it or that have to deal with the challenges are the people in the communities, the people that are local, the families, the educators, all of them feel the brunt of the things that happened up here in Lansing, and I think that's a little bit unfair, and it's a challenging situation.
I don't want to lead anyone to believe that everything was fine in Inkster from a financial standpoint. The district had been a deficit district for many years. On the other hand, this has been tracked for many years, and we've always found a way to come up with a deficit elimination plan and to keep the district in place. Now, should that have gone on for 10 years? I don't know, but it did. And suddenly to take an arbitrary year and to come up with legislation that suddenly the process we've been using for 10 years isn't okay anymore, I think that is unfair. I think the district was led to believe that they were headed in the right direction. The loan came in, and then suddenly this legislation went through. And I understand why a taxpayer or a parent or a resident of Inkster would be confused and probably a little unhappy. Certainly a loss of local control, if nothing else, with this situation.
You mentioned it briefly, and just briefly, I want to follow up on it. But should there be additional efforts to help the local school districts, the families deal with this issue? Should Lansing be more assistive, in terms of helping deal with maybe the cost of school buildings and other transition costs?
I think absolutely. I think that if we were given an opportunity to plan and to look at budgets and do all of that, I think that's one thing. But when this is thrust upon 4 receiving districts almost overnight, I definitely think that there should have been some involvement from those school districts in that financial support.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on today's show and providing the viewers with a lot of really good information about the challenges that are happening locally. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. Once again, this has been the Hopgood Hour. I'm State Senator Hoon-Yung Hopgood. Our guest today is Superintendent Chris Wigent with Wayne RESA. We've been talking about the Inkster School District dissolution and all of the challenges that has presented for families, for schools, and for communities in the area. Thank you for tuning in to this month's show. As always, please feel free to contact my office with any questions or concerns that you may have. And once again, this has been the Hopgood Hour.